Now, homicides, anybody who's hiked into Grand Canyon has probably had this morbid thought, man, nobody knows what's going on here. You know, we're alone here. I don't see anyone anywhere. And, you know, CSI is not going to come up with any clues if I do something bad. And ironically, even though it's a perfect place for murder, there have been very few murders. The only ones we did, there's a dozen deaths of one sort or another that were caused by another human being deliberately. Some of those were warfare. But the guy who takes the cake was serial killer Robert Merlin Spangler up there in the corner, who murdered his third wife. He murdered 3 of his wives, but one of them in Grand Canyon, very premeditated deal, pushed her off the edge, hiked out, and then had a story to tell about how the wind had knocked her off. So we have a long chapter in the book on homicide. It's a new homicide. The most notorious recent one was Maverick murdering his wife, Shirley, and that's quite a story as well, a Maverick story and a homicide story. But there are very few homicides, relatively speaking, more on the rim than in the canyon. And the big killer here, ironically, we're talking about nobody's been killed on a commercially rowed ore boat. Well, there have been 64 fatal airplane crashes with 379 deaths in Grand Canyon history, and some of them happen on the plateaus, the lower numbers there, and some of them happen in the canyon. This total does include the 1956 June 30 TWA United crash, but that still leaves 62 other fatal crashes and 250 odd fatalities. A lot of these are weather related and pilot error. 75% are pilot error. And we looked all over where we could find some kind of comparable place, like Phoenix. The Phoenix airspace has 1/6 of fatalities, 1/6. Hawaii has 20%. And I think we looked at Yellowstone and found that the Grand Canyon had 17 times more, had about 10 times more than Yosemite too.
Oh, how smart is that with this?
Okay, this is our new chapter, one new chapter.
Yeah, we decided to add a chapter about flora and fauna, so we put critter stories in there and stuff, and it's actually a funner chapter because most people live. It's a little bit happy. But freak errors and accidents, that's heavily male-related too, but we'll talk a little bit about there's 2 deaths from sacred datura poisoning from that, neurotoxic poisoning. We have had a death from hantavirus, unfortunately. One amazing story was a river guide who had it was raining and they flipped the paddle raft over. He wanted to get out of the rain and he was underneath the boat and the mouse ran across his face and he startled the mouse. And well, the mouse startled him, and then he startled the mouse peed, and he inhaled the mouse pee and got this virus from the mouse. And but he survived. Unfortunately, another river runner did die from hantavirus recently. The big thing that people worry about mostly are scorpions and snakes, but there's been no deaths from scorpions and no direct deaths from snakes. There was actually a guy, a prospector, who got so scared about the thought of being bit by the snake when the snake lunged at him, he fell over from a heart attack and died. The snake didn't actually bite him. And we have had 1 death from base jumping in Little Colorado. So where is the final tally? Well, the current tally. Total deaths were up to almost 600 accidental deaths. And they throw in the suicides and homicide, which we really hate, but we put them in there because we really wanted to have a complete record of all the fatal deaths. So it's approaching 700. So what have we learned from all of this? Well, you know, some people will never be saved, unfortunately. This was a suicider. I guess there was a suicide just maybe yesterday. This guy jumped off the Navajo Bridge, and this is Butch Barrett, one of the rangers who's doing the body recovery.
Those guys last year.
You know, we have the best safety net now than we've ever had. And Grand Canyon, I think it's the best EMS in the world, really. Well, in the United States, for sure. And we have sat phones and cell phones and all these things. But most people, it's a problem with ignorance by choice, really, and not ignorance by circumstance. You know? There's so much better access now than there was 20, 30 years ago to not die in Grand Canyon. Michael and I like to think that, the book has made a difference. Unfortunately, there's some people that just won't be reached.
Yeah, I think the interesting point Tom made is the access to information as a hiker or any other activity you're going to engage in Grand Canyon. The information, there's a flow, it's just, internet, one touch away. It's ironic how many people die due to their ignorance. And the issue of testosterone, being a young male and doing things that are dangerous, frequently coupled with ignorance. And I don't say ignorance is a dirty word, it's just a case. We live in a society where most people are urban, and they don't have the sorts of challenges as they grow up as a Puebloan boy or girl would. And they come to this environment thinking the park is like any park, Central Park, Disneyland, and they get in big trouble. So how do you, are males born dumb or they work their way into it? It's both. And the cure? Time. But the problem is you have to survive for that cure to take place. So if you train yourself or you caution people, friends of yours are entering into Grand Canyon, like your mom, say look both ways before you cross the street. There's certain things you should do in Grand Canyon before you commit yourself. Tom alluded to this, but there is a tendency, a really, really strong tendency for people to feel fully prepared if they have a cell phone. They require nothing else because a cell phone can dial 911. And I'm not joking or exaggerating. Many people consider cell phone to be the entire 100% preparation. Charge it and you're good. Other people, a little more savvy, know that cell phones don't work everywhere in Grand Canyon. They hardly work at all, so they have satellite phones. And those are actually a good thing to take. But better yet, you should have some information and preparation along with the satellite phone. PLBs or personal locator beacons are the worst things on earth because you cannot communicate anything except panic. And there have been lots. The vast majority of uses have been frivolous, but we all pay for it in our taxes, the responses anyway. GPS units good, but they can be left behind break or otherwise malfunction. So there is no substitute for personal responsibility to prepare oneself for the particular hike or other endeavor you're going to engage in Grand Canyon. Make yourself ready. The lack of personal responsibility, and this is one that affects all of us, the way bureaucracies respond to our ignorance and our mistakes is they write more laws, they restrict more activities, they curtail our freedom, and they reduce the flexibility anybody has in the wilderness plans by closing areas and creating yet more bureaucracy, and then more tragedies happen anyway. So with regard to Grand Canyon or any other wild area, we're pretty passionate about this particular message. Love it, respect it, be responsible when you visit it, and likely, because of our combined responsibility, it and we will both